So what does a threatened naval standoff in the Gulf of Oman have to do with the hourly rate of your grandmother's home care nurse in Ohio?
I mean, it sounds like a trick question, right?
Right. If you
Yeah.
just look at the headlines, those two things exist in completely different universes.
Totally disconnected.
Exactly. But, if you look at the actual mechanics of what the federal government did this week, they are connected. And they're connected by a very specific, a very aggressive strategy.
Yeah, they really are.
So today we are looking at the actions of the Trump administration from Friday, August 14th through Thursday, August 20th, 2026. And our mission today is singular. We are tracking the real-world fallout for you.
Just the concrete impact.
Just the impact. We are completely ignoring the political theater,
Hmm.
the advocacy framing of the press releases, and frankly, whatever the administration claims these policies will achieve.
Because the claims and the reality are often, well, they're miles apart.
Right. Instead, we're looking at the verified actions. We want to trace exactly how they hit your wallet, your civil liberties, the stability of your health care, and literally the cost of the goods you buy every single day.
And that approach is just essential right now because the defining characteristic of this specific week was not, the creation of massive new legislative frameworks.
No, not at all.
We didn't see a giant stack of new executive orders drafting blueprints for some brand new system.
Right. There was no grand rollout of a new bill.
Exactly. Instead, the highest consequence moves from August 14th to the 20th, they came almost entirely through implementation, through regulatory pressure, sudden threats, and litigation.
Just squeezing what's already there.
Precisely. The administration was applying maximum leverage to existing systems just to see what would bend.
It makes me think of a mechanic working on a car.
Oh, okay. I like that.
But instead of taking the engine apart in a clean garage to carefully install new parts.
Which would be the normal way to do it.
Right. The mechanic is leaning over the engine block while the car is still running red hot on the highway.
Oh, wow. Just speeding down the interstate.
Just zooming down the road. And the mechanic is just aggressively yanking on a wrench, tightening bolts completely at random, sparks are flying, the chassis is vibrating, and you, the listener, are just sitting in the passenger seat wondering, is this actually going to make the car run better?
Or is the whole engine block just about to crack under the pressure?
Exactly.
And honestly, the anxiety of that passenger is precisely what the markets and the labor force are experiencing right now.
Yeah.
And to understand why that engine is smoking, we really need to look at the most volatile form of that administrative pressure, which right now is happening on the geopolitical stage.
Right.
Between August 17th and August 20th, the administration basically deployed this sequence of economic and military threats that completely bypassed traditional diplomacy, and they aim straight at global supply chains.
Okay, let's lay out the timeline from the official actions this week, just so we have the facts. So, on August 17th, the president formally declined to extend an interim diplomatic framework with Iran.
Right.
And on that exact same day, he publicly threatened military action against Oman regarding an ongoing dispute over the Strait of Hormuz.
Which is a huge escalation.
Huge. Then the next day, August 18th, the administration officially states that absolutely no talks with Iran are happening. None.
And that rapid escalation, it culminated on August 20th. That's when Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent announced that the United States would impose what he called the toughest sanctions in history on Iran.
The toughest in history.
Yeah, that was the quote.
Yeah.
And crucially, this was paired with the administration's declaration of economic warfare against any nation that provides Iran with a financial lifeline.
Right.
So in the span of basically 4 days, we moved from a stalled but existent diplomatic framework into this posture of just unyielding economic coercion backed by the unilateral threat of kinetic military force.
I want to stop right there because I really want to push back on this framing.
Go for it.
Whenever Washington talks about economic warfare or, maximum pressure, they talk about it like it's a video game.
Yeah, exactly.
They frame it as if the Treasury Department just presses a button on a console and some health bar goes down in Tehran, and that is the end of the transaction.
Right, like there's no collateral damage.
Exactly. But we know that if you squeeze a balloon, the air doesn't just disappear.
It has to go somewhere.
It moves to the other side. So are these secondary sanctions and these sudden naval threats actually just a hidden, highly unpredictable tax on the American commuter?
They absolutely operate as a tax. And Honestly, the mechanical pathway of how that tax reaches you, the American commuter, is critical to understand.
Let's trace it.
Well, before we even trace the economics down to the gas pump, we have to flag the legal reality of what the administration actually did this week. Because there is a massive constitutional distinction embedded in those 4 days. The sanctions authorities that the Treasury Department is using, these are mostly grounded in the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA.
Right, IEEPA, we see that a lot.
Right. And various other delegated statutory powers. Those are firmly on the books. The executive branch genuinely has broad authority there.
But the threat against Oman, that is entirely different.
Completely different. I mean, Oman is not your own. It is a neutral, sovereign nation that jointly administers the Strait of Hormuz.
Right.
So threatening military action against Oman is not some legally adjudicated enforcement of a sanction. It was a unilateral statement made without congressional authorization under the War Powers Resolution. And while it isn't a formal declaration of war, making a kinetic threat against a neutral party in one of the most volatile maritime corridors on Earth, it dramatically escalates the risk of a military miscalculation.
And that risk is where the White House's advocacy framing completely falls apart for me.
Who?
Well, they frame this as a tough, uncompromising stance, right? That it will force concessions and protect global shipping without having to put American boots on the ground.
Right, the whole peace through strength argument.
Yeah. The idea is that we squeeze them economically so hard that they just capitulate.
Which completely ignores the immediate mathematical reaction of the global market.
Exactly.
I mean, when you publicly sever diplomatic channels, literally stating on August 18th that no talks are happening, and you simultaneously threaten military action in a maritime choke point that handles roughly 20% of the world's global oil consumption.
20%?
Yeah. You are not protecting the American consumer. You are instantly locking in a massive risk premium on global energy.
Okay, walk us through the exact mechanism of that risk premium. Because I think most of our listeners understand generally that geopolitical tension makes oil expensive.
Sure.
But how does the statement made in Washington on August 17th translate to a higher price at a gas station in Texas on August 20th?
It happens straight through the insurance and freight markets. Okay.
When the President of the United States threatens military action near the Strait of Hormuz, the Joint War Committee in London, which represents the major maritime insurance syndicates like Lloyd's, they instantly reassess the area.
Because their money is on the line.
Exactly. They look at the very real possibility that a giant oil tanker could be seized or struck by a stray missile or just caught in a blockade.
Right.
So they immediately multiply the insurance premiums for any vessel transiting the Persian Gulf.
So the insurance companies don't wait for Congress to declare war.
Nope.
They don't wait for a sanction to be formally drafted in the Federal Register. Just the mere threat triggers the cost.
Exactly. The cost to insure a very large crude carrier, a VLCC, can jump by hundreds of thousands of dollars literally overnight.
Wow.
Furthermore, the ship owners themselves, they demand higher freight rates to compensate for the physical danger to their crews and their vessels.
Which makes sense.
Right. So that massive sudden spike in transit costs is immediately priced into the global benchmark for crude oil. And because oil is a globally traded commodity, the fact that the United States produces a massive amount of its own oil domestically, that doesn't isolate us from that price shock, does it?
It does not at all. U.S. refineries buy and sell on the global market.
Right.
So when global crude prices spike due to Middle Eastern risk premia, the cost of wholesale gasoline in the United States spikes symmetrically.
Yeah.
And the damage does not stop at the gas pump for the person commuting to their office. It dictates the cost of diesel fuel.
Which is the absolute lifeblood of the entire domestic supply chain.
Exactly.
Every single item sitting on a shelf at your local grocery store was put there by a diesel-powered truck.
Precisely. The cost of aviation fuel goes up, which makes passenger travel and overnight logistics way more expensive.
Right.
The cost of petroleum-based raw materials for manufacturing goes up. So while the administration claims this is a foreign policy victory demonstrating American strength, the real-world execution means that a working family is suddenly paying a geopolitical premium on their groceries, their commute, and their utility bills.
Just an invisible tax.
It is an invisible tax levied through coercive leverage.
Okay, so they are applying this intense squeeze tactic against adversaries in the Middle East to force an outcome.
Right.
But what is so striking to me about this week is that they didn't just use this playbook on foreign adversaries.
No, they did not.
They deployed the exact same strategy of, coercive leverage via economic threat against our closest ally and most integrated trading partner.
You're looking at the northern border.
I am looking at Canada.
Yeah.
Based on the federal docket, the administration had scheduled 50% duties on nearly $20 billion worth of Canadian goods to take effect this week.
So 50%.
50%. We're talking about critical imports, auto parts, aluminum, alcohol, dairy products. But then, on August 18th, the administration paused the implementation of those duties for just 3 days.
A 72-hour window.
A 72-hour window, designed explicitly to force Canadian negotiators to the table to discuss lower auto and metals tariffs.
And the legal mechanism they are using here is crucial for understanding just how abnormal this is.
What are they using?
They are invoking Section 338 of the Tariff Act of 1930.
1930.
Yes. This is an archaic statute dating back to the Smoot-Hawley era. And that era was characterized by brutal, retaliatory trade wars that literally exacerbated the Great Depression.
Oh, wow.
By using an existing law, the administration can claim that they have the statutory authority on the books.
Right, it's technically legal.
But taking a massive 50% tariff and turning it into a 3-day ticking clock, that converts trade policy into a weapon of sheer market terror.
I want to dissect the actual logic of this. Because holding a 50% tariff over Canada's head to force a negotiation, it feels less like a strategic negotiation and more like threatening to blow up the bridge that both you and your neighbor use to commute to work.
That's a very good way to put it.
I mean, sure, your neighbor might blink because they don't want the bridge destroyed.
Yeah.
But if they call your bluff and you actually detonate it, you are the one walking to work in the rain.
Exactly.
It just seems like a catastrophic gamble with American blue-collar manufacturing jobs.
It is a phenomenal gamble, and to see why, we have to entirely discard the political rhetoric surrounding tariffs.
Okay, let's do it.
The administration's stated claim is that these duties protect U.S. producers from unfair Canadian competition, and that threatening them gives us the leverage to pry open foreign markets.
Right, that's what they always say.
But that relies on a fundamental misrepresentation of who actually pays a tariff.
Right. And most of our listeners know by now that foreign countries do not literally write a check to the U.S. Treasury to pay a tariff.
No, they do not.
We know Canada isn't paying this. But I think the actual mechanical pathway of how a 50% import tax hits an auto parts worker in Michigan is still widely misunderstood.
It is.
So walk us through the exact transaction at the border.
Okay, let's trace a specific piece of metal.
Let's do it.
Imagine a mid-sized American manufacturing company in Ohio that builds automotive transmissions. They buy specialized steel components from a supplier in Ontario, Canada, because the North American supply chain has been deeply integrated for decades.
Right. They basically function as one big region.
Exactly. So when that shipment of Canadian steel parts arrives at the U.S. border, U.S. Customs and Border Protection intercepts it. They look at the invoice value of the goods. If the administration's 50% tariff under Section 338 is active, the Canadian supplier does not pay a dime.
The American business in Ohio has to pay.
The American business must physically provide a customs bond or write a check directly to the U.S. government for 50% of the value of that shipment before those parts are legally allowed to enter the United States.
Unbelievable.
It is a massive, instantaneous tax levied solely on the American importer.
And what does that Ohio business do with a sudden, massive spike in their production costs? I mean, they really only have two options, and neither of them are good for the working class.
Exactly. Option one. The business just absorbs the cost to stay competitive.
Which instantly incinerates their profit margins.
Right. And to survive, they freeze hiring, they cancel planned wage increases for their American workers, or they begin layoffs.
Yeah.
Option two. They pass the cost down the line. They raise the price of the finished transmission, which raises the price of the assembled vehicle on the dealer lot.
So the American consumer ends up paying the tariff when they finance their new car.
Yep.
And with Canada specifically, the supply chain isn't just a one-way street. It is incredibly intertwined.
Oh, that is the most dangerous part of this gamble. In the North American auto industry, a single component, say like an engine block, might cross the U.S.-Canada border 3, 4, or even 5 times during the machining and assembly process.
Wait, really? 5 times?
Yes. So if a 50% punitive tariff is indiscriminately applied, you could theoretically be taxing the exact same piece of metal multiple times as it bounces back and forth across the Detroit-Windsor Tunnel.
That is insane, which is why this 3-day pause on August 18th is so destructive, even if the tariffs haven't technically taken effect yet.
Right.
I mean, how can an American factory manager sign a 6-month contract with a supplier when they don't know if their raw materials are going to cost 50% more by Thursday?
They can't. They simply cannot. And that is the true cost of governing through coercive uncertainty. Capital expenditure just freezes.
Yeah.
Businesses halt their expansion plans because they cannot forecast their costs. So even if Canada completely capitulates on August 19th, the threat itself acts as a massive drag on the domestic economy.
Right. Your job security in the manufacturing sector just becomes collateral damage in a high-wire game of political chicken.
Exactly.
And this brings us to the most critical macroeconomic reality of the week. Because whether we are paying a geopolitical risk premium on Middle Eastern oil or absorbing massive supply chain taxes on Canadian auto parts, all of this inflation and economic drag is piling on top of a foundational structural crisis that hit a huge historic milestone this week.
Ah, you're referring to the August 19th fiscal data release.
I am. On August 19th, the federal debt officially crossed the $40 trillion threshold. 40 trillion. And before anyone tries to spin this, let's be incredibly clear about the math for a second. This is not a partisan milestone.
No.
This is a mountain of debt that has literally doubled across multiple administrations, both Republican and Democratic. It is a bipartisan structural failure.
It absolutely is. And it is vital that we ground this number in reality. Because $40 trillion is a figure so large, it becomes abstract.
Right. It doesn't even feel real.
It has so many zeros that it just doesn't feel tangible to the day-to-day life of a citizen. It just looks like monopoly money on a Treasury Department spreadsheet.
Yeah. I think the most common analogy politicians use is they compare the national debt to a family's maxed out credit card.
Right. We have to tighten our belts.
Exactly. The government has maxed out its credit card, and now we have to tighten our belts. But that has always felt economically inaccurate to me. Because a sovereign government that prints its own currency doesn't operate like a household with a Visa card.
You are right to reject the credit card analogy because it fundamentally misrepresents how sovereign debt actually functions.
Right.
A much more accurate way to understand this $40 trillion milestone is to look at it like an adjustable rate mortgage on a massive aging apartment building.
Oh, okay. I like this. Walk me through the apartment building.
Okay, so the government is the landlord of this massive building, and the rent they collect from the tenants represents tax revenue.
Got it.
For years, the government has been taking out larger and larger mortgages to pay for operations, foreign wars, tax cuts. But they were doing it when interest rates were near zero.
Right, money was basically free.
Exactly. So the monthly mortgage payment, which is the cost to service the debt, was relatively low. The rent easily covered it.
But the rates are no longer at zero.
Exactly. To fight the very inflation we just discussed regarding supply chains and oil, the Federal Reserve has kept interest rates elevated. And because the national debt functions essentially like an adjustable rate mortgage, as the Treasury rolls over old debt and issues new bonds at these higher rates, the government's monthly payment just skyrockets.
The rent can no longer cover the massive spike in the interest payment.
Right. The interest cost becomes astronomical. We are now at a point where the federal government spends hundreds of billions of dollars a year solely on interest payments to bondholders, both domestic and foreign.
This is vanishing money.
Basically, the interest burden now rivals and threatens to exceed the entire defense budget.
And this is where the macroeconomic abstraction, really crashes into the working class reality.
Yes.
Because every single dollar the government spends just to service the interest on that $40 trillion is a dollar that gets crowded out of the public sector.
Precisely.
Is a dollar that cannot be spent on healthcare access, cannot be spent on education or fixing deteriorating bridges or fully funding veterans' benefits.
It creates a brutal zero-sum reality for the federal budget. The fiscal flexibility of the United States is effectively paralyzed right now.
Wow.
And if we connect this back to the specific actions the administration took between August 14th and the 20th, we see just how dangerous this coercion strategy really is.
How so?
Well, every time a tariff dispute with Canada slows domestic economic growth, which reduces tax revenue, or every time war posturing in the Gulf of Oman requires increased naval deployments and defense spending, it directly exacerbates this debt spiral.
So they're basically throwing sparks onto an engine that is already fundamentally compromised.
Exactly.
When the system is already staggering under a $40 trillion high-interest burden, hitting it with the wrench of a 50% tariff threat doesn't show strength. It just exponentially increases the probability of a total systemic breakdown.
And eventually, that mathematical reality forces one of two outcomes for the American public. There is no secret third option where the math magically balances itself. Either the government must enact significantly higher taxes on the working and middle class to pay down the interest,
Or
they must severely slash the public services and safety nets that everyday families rely on to survive.
which perfectly illustrates the theme of the week.
Yeah.
Leverage applied from the top, pain absorbed at the bottom.
That's a great way to put it.
But so far, we have only talked about economic leverage. We've talked about supply chains and debt and tariffs.
Right.
What is truly alarming about the period of August 14th through the 20th is that the administration did not limit this pressure tactic to foreign policy and trade.
No, they did not.
They deployed the exact same strategy of coercive leverage domestically,
Yeah.
targeting the press and civil liberties.
Yes, now we are moving into the regulatory space, which requires a very careful legal analysis.
Right. Let's get into it.
On August 18th, Disney, ABC, and 8 affiliated station licensees filed a major lawsuit against the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, and its chair, Brendan Carr. The lawsuit centers on the FCC's decision to force these stations into an unprecedented early broadcast license renewal proceeding.
And then on August 20th, just a couple days later, we saw a development in the courts.
Yes. On August 20th, federal judge Lauren Alicon declined to grant an accelerated, expedited hearing for Disney's bid to halt the proceedings.
Meaning what exactly?
Well, this is a procedural ruling, meaning the actual constitutional merits of the case remain entirely unresolved, and the FCC's early renewal proceedings are legally allowed to continue for now.
Okay, let's dissect the core of this lawsuit, because it strikes right at the heart of the First Amendment.
It really does.
Disney and ABC are alleging that this isn't just routine paperwork. They're claiming that the FCC is specifically targeting their broadcast licenses in direct retaliation for news coverage and programming that the administration fundamentally dislikes.
Right. And we must be incredibly precise here, legally speaking. We must distinguish between an allegation and a proven judicial finding.
Fair point.
Disney is alleging First Amendment retaliation. The FCC, conversely, claims that they are simply executing their statutory duty under the Communications Act of 1934.
Which requires them to do what?
It requires them to ensure broadcasters operate in the public interest, convenience, and necessity. So the government's framing is that this is just ordinary administrative oversight, nothing to see here.
But the constitutional stakes here are monumental, even without a final ruling on the merits.
Absolutely.
Because there is a very sharp legal line between ordinary, neutral administrative review and using the vast power of government licensing as a weapon to punish protected speech.
Exactly. I mean, the FCC absolutely has the lawful authority to regulate the public airwaves. That's not in dispute.
Right.
The legal battleground is over motive and selectivity. In First Amendment jurisprudence, if the government utilizes its regulatory apparatus to selectively target its critics while ignoring similar behavior from its allies, that is a textbook violation of free speech protections.
It makes me think of a local health inspector.
Okay, let's hear it.
Imagine a government health inspector who decides to park their official truck right outside a specific local restaurant every single day.
Okay.
And they're doing it just because the inspector personally hates the chef's politics.
Right.
The inspector doesn't even have to officially shut the restaurant down, right? They don't have to find a single rat in the kitchen.
No, they don't.
Just by parking the truck out front, walking in with a clipboard, asking aggressive questions during the dinner rush, and constantly threatening a shutdown. They achieve their goal.
They absolutely do.
They scare away the customers,
Yeah.
they stress out the staff, and they financially bleed the restaurant. The intimidation itself is the weapon.
That is a flawless analogy for what legal scholars and courts call the chilling effect.
The chilling effect.
Yes, and this is where we really have to look past the corporate names involved here and focus on the working class and civil liberties impact.
Right, because it's easy to get distracted by the name Disney.
Exactly, because the administration's framing relies on populism. It is very easy for a citizen to look at this lawsuit and say, while Disney is a massive multi-billion-dollar corporate behemoth, Why should I, an average citizen, care if they have to spend money fighting the FCC? I don't care about a billionaire's legal bills.
Right. Nobody is crying themselves to sleep over Disney's corporate overhead.
Exactly. But the direct pocketbook effect on Disney is entirely beside the point.
So what is the point for the listener?
The institutional effect on the flow of information is what matters to you. The journalism industry, particularly at the local level, operates on incredibly tight margins.
Oh, absolutely.
Their entire existence, their ability to broadcast the nightly news, depends wholly on maintaining that FCC license.
Right.
So if the broader media landscape looks at what is happening to ABC and they reasonably conclude that their own licenses could be put in jeopardy or put through an agonizing, financially draining early renewal audit,
Just for doing their jobs.
simply because they run an investigative story critical of the administration's policies.
They will censor themselves.
Without a doubt, it is human nature and its corporate survival.
Yeah.
Newsroom lawyers will step in and kill complex investigative pieces before they are ever published. Producers will soften their daily coverage. Reporters will avoid asking adversarial questions at press briefings.
Just to avoid the clipboard.
Exactly.
And the real-world effect on you, the listener, is a quietly degraded democracy.
That's exactly what it is.
You receive less aggressive coverage of local and national issues. You get fewer diverse viewpoints. You get significantly less accountability from the government.
Right.
Because the news you rely on to stay informed is no longer tailored to tell you the unfiltered truth. It is tailored to avoid angering the regulator holding the clipboard.
And that represents a profound degradation of civil liberties. When an administration realizes it can govern by regulatory intimidation, it fundamentally alters the fabric of free expression without ever having to pass a formal censorship law through Congress.
Right. They don't even need a new law.
No, the threat of the administrative process becomes the punishment.
It is the exact same playbook as the Canadian tariffs.
Yes, it's the exact same
I
mechanism.
mean, the administration doesn't even necessarily have to fully execute the 50% tax on auto parts to cause market panic.
Yeah.
Just the threat of the tariff forces the behavioral change they want.
Right.
And they don't have to officially revoke ABC's broadcast license to get a friendlier news cycle. The threat of the early renewal process forces the media to fall in line.
Exactly.
It is governance by relentless manufactured coercion.
That is the connective tissue of everything we have discussed today.
It really is.
But, while regulatory pressure against a massive media conglomerate like Disney involves corporate lawyers and boardrooms, what happens when this exact same enforcement pressure, this exact same coercive tactic, is turned against vulnerable working-class populations? And, more importantly, what happens to the domestic communities that physically rely on those populations to survive?
Right. And this brings us to the domestic policy arena that had perhaps the most direct, agonizing human consequence this entire week. The collision of aggressive immigration enforcement with the American healthcare system.
If we look at the federal dockets for August 18th and 19th, we see a really fractured legal landscape regarding immigration.
Okay, walk us through it.
So on August 18th, the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals upheld a narrow injunction blocking the Department of Homeland Security from conducting immigration enforcement near 8 specific plaintiff-affiliated houses of worship.
Okay, and what was the legal basis for blocking the administration there? Because obviously the administration wants to enforce everywhere.
The court relied on the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, or RFRA.
Oh, RFRA.
Right. RFRA was passed in 1993, and it mandates that the government cannot substantially burden a person's exercise of religion unless it is the least restrictive means of furthering a compelling governmental interest.
Okay.
The court essentially ruled that aggressive DHS enforcement specifically targeting these religious spaces violated that strict scrutiny standard.
Okay, so the administration faced a narrow defeat regarding religious sanctuary.
They did.
But in broader immigration policy, they actually secured a major ruling this week.
They did. Simultaneously, on August 18th and 19th, a federal judge in Massachusetts allowed the administration to terminate temporary protected status, or TPS, for over 5,000 Ethiopians.
Wow. And what was the justification there?
The judge based this on an intervening Supreme Court precedent which broadly empowers the executive branch's statutory authority to designate or terminate TPS based on conditions in the home country.
Okay, but the legal maneuvering over Ethiopian TPS in the courts this week, it is actually overshadowed by the catastrophic real-world implementation of a prior TPS termination that reached a total boiling point right now.
Yes, you are referring to the termination of Haitian TPS.
Yes, The administration previously ordered the end of temporary protected status for Haitians.
Right.
Now, if you listen to the administration's stated objective, their advocacy framing is entirely bureaucratic.
It sounds so clinical.
Right. They argue that TPS is, by statutory definition, temporary.
Yeah.
They claim that the specific crisis conditions in Haiti that originally justified the protection are no longer sufficient to maintain it.
They are framing it to their political base as this huge victory for the rule of law, a promise kept to, clean up the paperwork and reduce the number of foreign nationals holding U.S. work authorization.
That is the claim.
Yeah.
But this week, an in-depth investigation by Reuters documented the catastrophic domestic fallout of that policy. Because if you look at the data, this is not just an immigration story about paperwork.
No, not at all.
This is a severe government-mandated labor shock delivered directly to the American healthcare system.
And the data is staggering. Reuters identified that roughly 21,000 Haitian TPS holders are currently employed as caregivers in the United States.
21,000 people.
21,000 workers who are, right now, losing their legal work authorization due to this administration's policy.
Unbelievable.
And those 21,000 caregivers are directly responsible for the daily physical care of approximately 77,000 disabled and elderly American patients.
77,000 American patients.
Yes.
This is where we just have to completely discard the White House framing.
Absolutely.
They are going on television claiming a political victory for being tough on immigration. But the reality is that they are walking into the most fragile sector of the American healthcare system and taking a sledgehammer to a critical support beam.
It is a massive distributional shock, and we really have to understand the specific mechanics of the elder care and disability support sectors in this country to see why this is so devastating.
Okay, let's break it down.
These facilities, nursing homes, memory care units, group homes for severely disabled adults, they are already operating in critically labor-scarce environments.
Right, there's already a shortage.
A massive shortage. And the profit margins are razor thin. Much of their revenue is dictated by fixed Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement rates.
Meaning the facility can't just magically double their hourly wages overnight to attract 21,000 new American workers to replace the ones they are losing.
Exactly. The financial elasticity simply isn't there. Furthermore, the work is physically demanding, it's emotionally taxing, and it is chronically underpaid.
Yeah, it's incredibly hard work.
So when the federal government suddenly strips legal work authorization from 21,000 established, trained caregivers, the employers are legally trapped.
Winning traps.
Well, to avoid massive federal penalties for employing undocumented workers, these facilities are forced to lay off their Haitian staff instantly.
Which means the facility is thrown into an immediate, profound crisis.
A literal life-threatening crisis. Healthcare facilities are bound by strict legal requirements regarding patient-to-staff ratios.
Right.
If a nursing home suddenly loses 10% of its staff overnight, they still have the exact same number of patients who need to be fed, bathed, and medicated in the morning.
Yeah.
So to maintain the legally required ratios, the facility has to force their remaining staff into mandatory, exhausting overtime.
Which burns out the remaining staff, accelerating even further turnover.
Exactly. It's a death spiral.
And the financial cost of paying time and a half overtime spikes the operational cost of the facility. So where does that cost go?
Where does it always go?
Right. It gets passed directly onto the patient's families in the form of higher fees.
And beyond the financial burden, we have to look at what happens to the patients themselves.
Yeah.
We were talking about 77,000 American citizens. They completely lose their continuity of care.
Trace that domino effect for us. What does that actually look like for a family?
Okay, imagine an elderly American patient in Ohio with severe Alzheimer's disease.
Okay.
For the last 3 years, they have been cared for by the exact same Haitian TPS holder. They have built a deep, essential bond.
Which is so important for Alzheimer's patients.
It's critical. That caregiver knows the patient's intricate daily routine. They know their behavioral triggers, how to calm them down during a dementia episode, the exact timing of their medications.
Yeah.
Overnight, because of a policy shift in Washington designed solely to demonstrate political toughness, that caregiver is legally barred from working and disappears from the patient's life.
The patient is just entirely destabilized.
Completely distressed, their cognitive decline actually accelerates due to the broken routine. The facility is understaffed, so the quality of care overall drops.
And the family.
The patient's family is scrambling. They're desperately trying to find alternative care solutions that they likely cannot afford. The quality of life for that American citizen is permanently degraded.
It is genuinely enraging when you break down the mechanics of who is actually paying the price for this policy.
It really is.
I mean, the administration claims a win, but the people absorbing the blow are not just the immigrants losing their status. The people paying the ultimate price are the working-class American families.
Exactly.
It is the family whose grandmother just lost her home care nurse. It is the family of the disabled child whose group home just had to double its monthly fees because they are paying emergency overtime to cover a government-mandated staff shortage.
That is the unvarnished reality of the policy's implementation.
Right.
The administration successfully achieves its stated objective of revoking work authorizations, sure, but the offset, the devastating human and financial cost, is entirely borne by U.S. patients and families who are not immigration beneficiaries themselves.
There's simply collateral damage in a political pressure campaign.
It is a predictable domestic labor shortage imposed by the government directly onto its own most vulnerable citizens.
And, this circles us back perfectly to the mechanic tightening the bolts on the running engine.
It does.
Every single action we have tracked this week follows the exact same pattern.
If we synthesize all the threads from August 14th to the 20th, the unifying characteristic of this administration's governance was the maximum unyielding deployment of coercive leverage.
We saw it across every single domain.
We really did. We saw tariffs deployed as a ticking clock threat against the supply chains of our closest allies in Canada.
Right.
We saw unilateral military threats and sanctions deployed against neutral parties like Oman and adversaries like Iran, spiking the cost of global energy for Americans.
Yeah.
We saw regulatory licensing threats subtly deployed against domestic broadcasters like ABC, chilling the First Amendment rights of the press.
The health inspector with the clipboard.
Exactly. And we saw status termination threats deployed against the very caretaking workforce that keeps the American healthcare system from collapsing.
Just squeezing the fuel lines, ratcheting down the valves, turning up the heat. And sure, maybe the mechanic forces a rusty part to snap into a new position for a moment. Maybe the Canadian government blinks on the auto tariffs to avoid a recession. Maybe newsrooms soften a few headlines to protect their broadcast licenses. But when an administration governs primarily through this kind of disruption, through relentless threats, and through heavy-handed leverage rather than stable, predictable policy, it creates a permanent, exhausting state of anxiety.
Constant uncertainty.
And the ultimate thought I want you to walk away with this week is whether the promised political victories of this pressure cooker approach will ever actually outweigh the quiet, daily instability it injects into your life, your wallet, and the healthcare of everyday Americans. Will the engine hold, or is it already starting to crack?